Hello, fellow fantasy sports fans. Welcome to MFSN The Hub's Fantasy Basketball Waiver Wire Show every Thursday at 4:45 p.m. Eastern, 1:45 p.m. Pacific. This is Waiver Wire Week 3, but of course it's NBA Week 4. And I'm here, as always, with Casey, Vlad to the Bone, Scheinvold, but no Ross the Boss today. Just you, Casey.
I'm never going to shake my baseball team name, am I?
You can if you want. I mean, we can discuss. Let's see how... Let's go through the waiver wire today, and then we'll turn our attention to that.
Yeah, maybe we'll take suggestions.
Okay, so as always, we are doing 60% and under rostership in Yahoo. We are going to talk in pretty positionless form when it comes to fantasy basketball. The fact is the NBA is a pretty positionless league at this point, and we see no reason to discuss it any other way. We will mention position eligibility because that's part of why people are valuable in these fantasy leagues. So, Casey, we have the guy on our cover is Alex Caruso. I want to talk about him first. And he's a point guard, shooting guard. He's 46% owned. One of the reasons that I like him, of course, 29 steals up to this point in the season is a huge amount of steals at this point in the season. The other reason I like him is just the way the Bulls are playing and the players that they have. There's so many great players on that team. What's your take on Caruso?
I'm a big fan of him because he's also, he's involved in most of the plays, but he's not one of those players who needs to shoot, so he doesn't force shots up, so his percentages are usually pretty strong. So I agree with that. Although when I'm looking at the waiver wire, and it's something I've been kind of regretting a little bit since the draft, one of the things I've noticed is that I believe it's much simpler to find guards or the smaller side of the positionless players on the waiver wire, and there's more of those kind of impact players. Big men are really hard to find, and impactful big men, I don't think there's that many of them. So when I'm looking at the waiver wire, I tend to try to find people who can help me in those at those positions, shoot a high percentage, get decent points, get rebounds, throw some blocks in there, maybe a steal. They tend not to turn the ball over as much because they're not as much responsible for dribbling and that sort of stuff. So I tend to look a little more power forward center, the big men in the league.
Actually, this is just a good point in general. Now, listen, this is one of the reasons that our show is a bit different than others. We don't just talk about the players to pick up. We really talk about the strategies. So Casey's pointing out an important strategy here. When you're on the waiver wire, if there are two guys and one of them has a very rare commodity or a more rare commodity and the other guy is extremely replaceable, grab the guy who has the rare commodity. I think that's what you're saying about big men, right, Case?
It is. And the thing I've noticed, if you talk about the superstars in the league or the top 10 to 15 picks of a fantasy draft, most of them tend to be that small forward shooting guard, point guard, because those tend to be the glamour positions, the ones that score the most points. The Jokic's, the Karl Anthony Towns, those types of players are much more rare to find a big man who's a superstar. So what I was saying is I regretted in the draft is I didn't stick with my gut and stick with that strategy to invest most of my auction budget into to my front court.
Yep. And listen, this is another strategy. You've got to go with the strategy that you knew all along, because if you don't, you're going to regret it the whole season. So, I went into the draft thinking, you know what, this time I don't want to go for that big three. I want to get, one, real blue chip guy. I want to have a lot of good guys. I wanted to try out something new. How's it working out so far? It's mixed, but I have to say I'm deep. And
that's what I'm noticing as well. I'm actually having a good season so far, but I didn't invest. Now, and for those of you who didn't watch the draft, which I'm assuming a lot of people didn't, Dan and I think you can vouch for this, were surprised that the prices for certain players were much lower than we anticipated them to be. So we got very lucky, and I got some quality players for less money than I thought I would.
Well, this is another thing. You have to know your league. So there's going to be, if you're playing with new players in the league, you have to be aware. The prices may be lower than you think, or they may be higher than you think, and you're going to have to adjust during the draft. Okay, let's talk about some of these bigs that you're looking at on the wire then.
Well, when I'm looking at the wire, the one guy who jumped out at me, he's an old name. He's been around, it feels like, since the beginning, the turn of the century, no pun intended, is LaMarcus Aldridge in Brooklyn. He's playing great. Claxton is hurt without a timetable for him to come back, so he's getting that. The playing time there. It's a dynamic offense in general. When you put Harden and you put Durant on the floor, Irving would make it even more dynamic. Obviously we haven't really seen him yet. So, but he's shooting 56% from the floor. 90% almost from the free throw line. He's getting a block a game. He's putting up double digits in points and almost double digits in rebounds. And those are some, I mean, if you're looking for players to play, I mean, that's somebody who's always going to help you in your lineup.
That's absolutely true. And meanwhile, I think the stats you were quoting were probably his
just for the last week. I apologize.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to say, because for the season, he's shooting 62%, actually, even more valuable, although his free throw percentage is a little bit lower. But it's true. You cannot, I mean, I scooped up LaMarcus Aldridge myself. I'm not sure why he was out there, really. And look, he's ranked 82nd overall in Yahoo. So you could say, oh, yeah, he's a fringe own. But it's more because of what you're saying. There's not that many of these guys that are big men that are like that. Now, here's another
in the last week, he's ranked 33rd, so he's certainly playing well enough to be a must start, not just a must own.
Yeah, and he the other thing is he's got big time upside. You know, in the NBA, name recognition, it's not like in some of the other leagues. Guys lose their name recognition the instant they're no good anymore. They're just nobody. You know, take Eric Bledsoe. He's just not. He was a name value. He's probably a little more owned than he should be for name value. But names go very quickly in the NBA. LaMarcus Aldridge's name hasn't gone down yet because he hasn't stopped performing. Really, he's a guy to scoop up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Another big guy I looked at just for this week. He's not somebody who's going to stay on your roster long. But again, one of these things about basketball, and one of the things about being successful in basketball, is the willingness to ride the hot hand or ride somebody who's getting playing time while somebody else is hurt, and then be willing to cut bait and look the other way. Is Drew Eubanks in San Antonio? You know, Pirtle is the starter. Poeltl, however people pronounce it, is the starter, but he's hurt right now. And in the last week, in the last 3 games, I mean, we're talking 67% shooting percentage, 77% from the free throw line, 7 boards, 14 points, over a block a game, a steal a game, 2 assists a game out of a power forward center, and he's playing 22 minutes. So if he plays that well, he's going to help you while he's in there. And if he keeps playing that well, even when Pirtle comes back, Eubanks is somebody who might have carved out a role for himself, and you've just gained a lot of value.
Another good point, you know, in the NBA roster, the way coaches play their rosters really changes over time. You've got to pay attention to it and see how's this getting adjusted. And it also is the case, another piece of strategy for head-to-head, very different than with rotisserie, where there are actually people who play rotisserie basketball. I played it once. It was very interesting.
I haven't. I've always been a head-to-head guy.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I'm more of a rotisserie guy in baseball, but in basketball, you really need the head-to-head. It really is true. A 1-week rental, it can win you the week. It can be a huge difference. So don't be afraid to use the back end of your roster that way, especially if you're not crazy about the guys that you have. I'm having trouble because I don't have anybody I feel I can cut. So I'm looking at guys out there and I'm like, I don't know. That means and I'm not saying that because I'm saying, oh, I'm so good. I just, certain teams have depth. I need to trade some depth so that I can do that sort of thing. So here's another guy that I would like to add. He's another big man, Royce O'Neale. Yep. Utah Jazz, small forward, power forward. The first number that pops out of me is 31 minutes a game. Now, some of that might be in relation to certain injuries and things like that, but Royce O'Neale has gotten good time on the court for a long time now. And the fact is, he's putting up decent numbers. Now, here's the stat that I love the most about Royce O'Neale. 20 steals from a big man. Now, listen. Is he actually a big man like in the NBA? Like I said, who knows who plays what anymore? But he has big man eligibility, and you've got to plug him into your lineup where he fits. You can't plug him into a guard position. If you're getting 20 steals from a small forward, power forward, that gives you a lot of versatility. So I think you could do a lot worse than Royce O'Neale. Now, before we move on to more players, we're going to have a word from our sponsor. And I've been noticing Killcliff, their commercials, I enjoy them very much, but there's one in particular that's making me laugh. It's this kind of grandma. I'm not sure where she's from exactly, but I'm going to read it like her. Ready? Killcliff CBD, the best tasting CBD drink in the world. Orange Kush, Mango Tango, Strawberry Days, the grapest of all time, and Joe Rogan's spicy pineapple called the Flamin' Joe. Straight to my drink hole. founded by a Navy SEAL for those who aren't Navy SEALs. It's the biggest no-brainer in the history of drinks. Go to killcreek.com. How was that for you, Case?
That was awesome. That was well done.
Courtney, thumbs up. Is that good? All right, good. Well, that took my breath away. Case, I'm going to turn it over to you now because I got to recover from that.
How do I follow that?
That's a tough act to follow. Listen, just don't worry about it. We're on to the next thing. Okay. Remember, in sports, you got to have a short memory. We forget that woman. We move on to the next player. Who do we got?
Okay. The next player. Well, you talked about Royce O'Neale. He was my one of my top 3 pickups this week, too. Another guy who happens to be on Hot Rod Time Machine, which, for those of you who don't know, is the name of Dan's basketball team, is Jae Crowder in Phoenix. He's another guy who it feels like he's been in the league forever, and he's a role player, but he doesn't play a tremendous amount of minutes, but he's playing 30 minutes a game this last week, which is a significant amount of time, and he's shooting a good he's not shooting a great percentage right now, only 40% from the field. But he gets you points, he gets you rebounds, he'll give you 2 steals and 2 assists a game. That's what he's been doing for the last week. And those peripheral numbers are pretty darn helpful.
Okay, now I'm going to jump in for a sec because we have a comment coming in from a viewer. Trilly Seb is asking Sabonis and Cade Cunningham for Anthony Davis. Who wins that trade? I know my answer on this, but I'm curious what you're going to say first. I'll give you the first.
I am a huge Domantas Sabonis fan. I think he's just underrated and incredibly reliable and durable. My fear with Anthony Davis is the injury factor. He seems to miss. He's got a bad back. He seems to miss however many games a year, and it seems like it's a bunch. They like to rest their players a lot in LA because they're looking more playoffs. They try to drive their team. I would be more comfortable with the Sabonis and Cade Cunningham side of that trade personally. I don't know what Anthony Davis gives you that's so much better. He probably blocks more shots than Sabonis, but what he gives you that's so much better than Sabonis that it would be that I would make that trade.
Okay, now, ultimately, I think a lot of it comes down to whether you think Anthony Davis's health is going to get in the way a lot, because he is the one with the biggest upside. I think in fantasy basketball, some of it depends on how your roster is constructed. With the team that I have going right now, I would rather be on the Anthony Davis side of that deal, partly because you're getting more plausible upside. You're also getting the roster spot. Here's the other thing. Cade Cunningham, he's a very talented rookie. We could potentially expect big things from him.
But they get tired.
What's that?
I said that rookies tend to get tired at some point during the season because they're not used to an 81 or 82
they also tend to be very inefficient at the beginning, and they have some real down games a lot of the time. It's not always the case. And in fact, for those of you who drafted Evan Mobley, as a Cavs fan, I'm very excited about that. But for those of you who drafted Evan Mobley, he's not playing like a rookie, and part of that's just his skill set being so different. But I agree with your analysis, Casey. If I was a team that was looking for more, if I had more roster space, I'd be totally fine being on the other side of the ball. And in fact, if you told me that you were dealing Domantas Sabonis straight up for Anthony Davis, you could even make an argument right there, even without Cade Cunningham in the deal, for the reasons that you said. Because Domantas Sabonis
the issue with Cade Cunningham, I'm looking up his stats for the season. He's shooting 28% from the field.
Yeah.
Like, that is murder. He's shooting 93 from the free throw line. He doesn't hurt you there. He gets you points, boards, and assists. He's got to steal a game. But unless you're punting on field goal percentage, and punting just means giving up on that category completely, you can't start somebody who's shooting 29% for the season from the field.
And if you're carrying around a guy in your roster that you can't start at all, that's very, very hard in fantasy basketball. Would you agree with that?
I would. And for example, I am carrying right now Kevin Porter Jr. And I'm always on the fence about whether to keep him or whether to drop him because he's not shooting a great percentage and he's turning the ball over like crazy. But I also remember watching him last year and seeing his stats last year where he'd go on these runs where it looked like the most efficient high volume scorer on the floor who would also get you some rebounds. And so I struggle with that pretty mightily.
Yeah, it's tough to figure out how to deal with situations like that because you don't want to cut bait on a guy like Kevin Porter Jr. or Cade Cunningham. Although, listen, let me make an argument for the fact that with rookies, sometimes you can go ahead and cut bait with them. I drafted Suggs. Why am I blanking on his first name? Jalen Suggs. I mean, I was a huge fan of his, in the NCAA tournament. He hit that big shot. If they had gone on to win the championship, that would be like one of the most legendary shots of all time.
It was a great shot.
Still going to be a great shot in the history of NCAA. But I don't expect much out of rookies for the most part.
Yeah. And looking at the stats in that trade, I think if I trusted Anthony Davis to stay healthy, I would want the Anthony Davis side of that, just because he averages 2 more blocks a game than Sabonis so far this season, and he's always been a better shot blocker in that respect. And Cunningham is somebody I don't think, if you're shooting 30%, you can roster at this point.
Right. So listen, again, I can see you potentially certain people wanting to have Sabonis instead, but any of these players can get injured. I would go for Anthony Davis in the upside personally.
Yeah, and looking at what you were saying earlier with regards to you have a lot of depth and you're trying to get more impactful players and gain roster spots, that would be the type of trade that you, given what you said your roster construction is, those are the type of trades you'd be hoping to do.
Right. Now, if I was the opposite way, though, I would probably be looking for Domantas Sabonis and somebody other than Cade Cunningham. Because Cade Cunningham, his value is high based on the name of being the number one pick, but his value in the fantasy leagues is unstartable. So you'd almost rather get any player other than him at the moment, unless you truly believe he's going to, kick it into high gear. But even so, you could end up wasting a number of weeks, and you can't waste weeks in these leagues. Now, let me talk a little bit about a couple players on the wire who I think are, their numbers are getting, they're similar levels of where they should be, maybe like Kelly Oubre Jr. He's 54% owned. I can see why. He's the 92nd player in Yahoo. He hasn't done that well, but he does some of everything. He's pretty solid. But I think that Kelly Oubre's numbers are going to go up. I mean, first of all, his minutes are solid. He does a little bit of everything. His value right now is depressed by a low free throw percentage. I think historically he doesn't actually have that low of free throw percentage. His numbers could go up. Is he going to win you leagues? Probably not. Is he going to be a very useful player on your bench? I think so. Here's another guy that I really love, Reggie Jackson. And by the way, Kelly Oubre is one of these shooting guard small forwards, and as you know, I love those. But Reggie Jackson is point guard shooting guard. He doesn't have the forward eligibility, but he is playing 35 minutes a game. Now, I know what you're saying. Kawhi Leonard is not there, and that is true. But even so, if you watch the playoffs last year, Reggie Jackson can catch fire in a way that few players can. This guy is amazing. And he was a great baseball player. No, I'm just kidding. That's different. Different Reggie Jackson. But listen, this Reggie Jackson, he's ranked 113th overall, and that's partly because he's shooting 39%. But he's hit 31 threes. He's got 176 points. He's dealing out assists all over the place, 45 assists on the season so far. He doesn't even turn the ball over that much. This is another thing I really like about the guy. So those are 2 other guys. Case, give me a couple other guys you have your eye on.
Well, and they're guys I mentioned last week. One is TJ McConnell, the point guard shooting guard for Indianapolis. I know I was talking about the need for, and he's 60% rostered, so he just makes the cut. I was talking about the big guys, but this is a guy who plays 31 minutes a game. The last week he's shooting almost 65% from the floor. 18 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, and a steal per game, and almost a block per game in the last. I mean, that's top 40, top 50 player numbers, and he's available in 40% of the leagues. Another guy I like, although he's not playing a lot of minutes, is Otto Porter Jr. in Golden State. Just a solid player, not flashy, nothing exceptional that he does. He has been hitting the last week an average of 3 3-pointers a game. So in 3 games, he hit 9 3-pointers in this past week. He's on the best team, well, the team that's playing the best in the NBA right now, with the top fantasy player in the NBA and Steph Curry right now. So he gets plenty of open looks. He gets to space the floor on the opposite side of Steph Curry. So he's only playing in the teens in his minutes per game, but his per minute performance is really strong. And if he keeps it up long enough, you have to imagine his minutes are going to keep going up too.
Okay, well, this is a great segue for me because you're talking per minute efficiency, which makes me have to talk about my favorite player, Hassan Whiteside. Oh my God!
All right, now listen.
A little bit of history. I own when I make mistakes. Another thing that sets our our network apart is that we will own when we made a mistake because we want to keep your trust. So I was high on Hassan Whiteside going into last season because he had just had a monstrous season with Portland, but I did not factor in how much this guy can disappear, and especially when he goes to a new organization. The thing about Hassan Whiteside is when he goes to a new organization, it can be horrible or it can be great. He went to a new organization again, and I think Utah is the kind of organization that can bring out some good things in him. The interesting thing about Hassan Whiteside, I don't know what to make of this other than the fact that I know that free throws relate to the mental side of the game. When Hassan Whiteside is enjoying himself, he's hitting free throws. He is shooting 88% from the free throw line so far. He seems
crazy
to be enjoying himself. Now, he's only playing 16 minutes, close to 17 minutes a game, but he's got 16 blocks on the season. He's got 87 rebounds. There's a lot of huge upside. And listen, if he's enjoying himself there and somebody goes down, this is a guy that you need to own, I think. I hesitate to recommend Hassan Whiteside again, but I'm doing it in a very different way. Case, what's your take on him?
I like Hassan Whiteside. I've liked him from, last year we didn't like him very much, but I liked him when he was with the Heat. Didn't. Then he went to, did he go to Portland next? Where did he go after the Heat?
He went to Portland, but then he went to the Sacramento Kings.
Sacramento Kings, which is where he was terrible.
Yes.
I do agree with you on the per minute basis. I like the efficiency monsters because I think if they keep doing it, their minutes are going to go up. Now the problem is he's behind Rudy Gobert, and Gobert likes to eat all those minutes. Whiteside doesn't have a lot of positional flexibility or fluidity like we talk about. He's not going to be an outside threat. So, and neither is Gobert. So I don't think they share the court very much. Right. I could be wrong, but that's my impression. But I don't think that's a bad pick. The guy I'm looking at is somebody who I owned last year. And this is another thing you have to remember that's important. There are going to be guys who you've owned in the past when you play for multiple seasons, like many, fantasy players have, who frustrated you so much that you can never own them again, or who were so good for you that you have a soft spot for them and want to find room for them on your bench. And that guy for me is Thaddeus Young in San Antonio. I owned him last year. He was on the Chicago Bulls. And if you looked at like his month and a half, 6 to 8 weeks pre the All-Star break or pre the trade deadline, like he was one of the most efficient, most effective players on my team and helped me single-handedly win a few weeks. And he's playing a lot right now, again, because we talked about the injuries to San Antonio, but he's, in 25 minutes this past week in 3 games, he's played 25 minutes a game and shot 82% from the field, taking over 7 shots a game. Like we're not talking 2 to 3 shots a game. He doesn't give you a good free throw percentage, but he takes less than 2 free throws per game. So it doesn't hurt you as much. And he gets you points, rebounds, blocks. He even throws in assists when he's feeling good. He has five boards and 5 assists each game, averaging over a steal and over a block a game for the past week. That's somebody who I really like this week.
Yep. Well, it's hard to pass up a guy like that who's done so well for you. And Thaddeus Young has put up big numbers in the past. I want to make a distinction, though, just for the viewers out there. And I want to hear from you guys also. Put your comments below. We love to have some fantasy sparring with you guys and comparing notes on these things. But there are different kinds of players we're recommending on this. And I wanted to say Hassan Whiteside is not like one of those top recommendations for me. He's more one of the guys that is like, if you need blocks in a given matchup, give him a try. You could catch lightning in a bottle if Rudy Gobert goes down or anything like that, but Casey's point is a good one. His upside is very much capped at the moment with the current setup. I'd much rather have a guy like LaMarcus Aldridge. So everybody that I've mentioned so far, more in that camp.
Yeah, and I think you made an important point there, Dan. One of the things that's really important to do in fantasy basketball, and I've noticed this because I don't play baseball head-to-head, so I don't worry as much about – I do mostly rotisserie there or all rotisserie. But if you're in a league like ours where you can pick up 4 players a week at any time, you can pick up those players. Look at the standings come Thursday or Friday of that week, and you might look at it and see, okay, there is no way I'm going to catch up in assists, or there's no way I'm going to catch up in steals or in a free throw percentage. And you decide just to bail on that category. But let's say I'm only 2 blocks behind and this guy has 3 games left and he's a block machine. on the waivers, that's somebody you target to pick up to win that week. And so it does. That's another thing that's really different, I think, in head-to-head basketball versus a lot of maybe some of the other leagues, is that the value of certain players can change from day to day, depending on where you are in the week and where your team is performing in your matchup.
It's a great point, and now I'll add something to it, which is don't get too attached to your back-end players. They may have value, but there's going to be value on the wire also. I like to think of my back-end roster spots as flexible in the way that Casey's talking about. And if you think that one win in a given week can't make a difference, it could change the entire season, because it can be the difference between whether you make the playoffs or not. This happened in fantasy football once, but it was like one play I made, choosing between one player or another, determined whether I made the playoffs. And the guy who made the playoffs instead won the championship. That one decision. I hate to say that because I don't want you guys to agonize over every little decision, but just try your best to gain the advantages you can. And in these leagues where you can add somebody, especially right away, grab the guys who are working for the categories that you need. Couldn't agree more. Now, we got a couple minutes left here, Case. I'm wondering if there's anybody else that we haven't mentioned that we really should mention. I do want to say this. Sometimes you're going to hear us repeating names on these shows, and people will say, oh, you already said him. Well, the whole point is this. If we're having to repeat saying them, you haven't gotten the message about them yet. We're trying to get you the best players that you can get. I will repeat these names as many times as you need me to. Alex Caruso, he's only 46% owned. If I'm mentioning him next week, then you guys have not done your job. Go get him. Go get him now.
Yeah, I think with all the drama in Philadelphia and the Ben Simmons stuff, Maxey is the starter there, and he's doing great with it. But Shake Milton is another guy who's putting up really solid numbers right now and is getting an opportunity because of the flux in that backcourt, and he's taking advantage of it. Golden State, another player who's not playing a tremendous amount of minutes, but is a steals machine, is Gary Payton Jr., Gary Payton II. Like the Glove's son is suddenly playing like the Glove defensively. And that goes back to what you're talking about, what I was talking about earlier. If you need steals, and it's what's today, Thursday, so you only have a weekend left, and let's say he has 2 games and you think you can win steals still, adding Gary Payton II, even if he's going to cost you in another category where you're not as competitive or you have a big enough lead that you're not worried about it, becomes really valuable.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to mention one other type of player that you may want to add here. Okay. And it crosses all kinds of positions and types of players. I'm talking about the type of player who has been underperforming and it is still under 60% roster, and you want to scoop them up now because they are going to go up in value. A guy like Joe Harris on Brooklyn, he's 56% owned. He's 128th in his ranking. I expect that to go up because he's got a skill set that just translates. It's going to keep going. This guy is a three-point shooter on a team with Kevin Durant and James Harden, even with Kyrie Irving not there. Meanwhile, you got on the inside LaMarcus Aldridge kicking him back out to him. This is a guy that you want on your team. I don't care that his ranking is not that great. Joe Ingles is another guy. I talk him up all the time, Average Joe.
You like the Average Joes.
And the thing is, this is a guy with, again, a very translatable skill set that's not going anywhere. Look at your team. See if you need these three-point specialists, but don't get scared off by the fact that Joe Ingles is ranked 143rd overall. That number's going up. If you look at what he did last year and the year before, it's the same. Is he playing the same amount of minutes? Yes. What does that mean? It means this value is not going anywhere, but back up to where it was. So guys like that are the ones that I want to scoop up. Case, any last thoughts before we wrap up for today?
No, I'm good. This was fun.
Well, we obviously covered it very well because Case is lost for words.
I know.
Guys, I hope we provided you some great names out here. There's lots more to discuss, and we'll keep them coming, but I want to see some of these names we're mentioning disappear off this list and get over 60%. That's our goal, is to make sure we are getting you good information. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be here same time next week. That's 4:45 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays, 1:45 p.m. Pacific, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Ever since I've been doing these commercials for Kilkerless, my Tinder account has been blowing up, dog. Ooh, those horny young fellas sliding into Brandy's DMs. Mr. Castle Master, how about that? Kill Clip Octane CBD, the killer classical. All the benefits of caffeine smooth over with CBD. Own it.